Hello, hello.
A lot of people coming here. Well, hello everyone from Istanbul. Right now I'm in Turkey, where I'm actually from. So, and you?
I am in Antwerp, Belgium.
Cool.
Is my new home. I know that we've met a few times on calls, but this webinar is we're going to be talking about unlocking fluency. We're both polyglots and we're here. Shout out to Lingoda, which is an online language school that we've both taken classes with. They're powering today's conversation. We're going to get into tips, tricks, and all of the above. And İclal, I want to know, what languages do you speak?
Well, cool. My native language is Turkish. I obviously speak English, and then I learned on my own French, Italian, Spanish, Russian, and German, all of which I speak fluently. And I'm learning Swedish and Dutch. And
Girl, it's too much. It's too much.
I remember watching your videos when I was learning French.
Which is crazy. How old were you? You were probably like 12 years old.
Yeah, exactly.
C'est magnifique. That's
Merci.
really cool. So yeah, I'm Joe and I speak originally I'm Brazilian. So my first language was Portuguese and then I moved to the States, had to learn English, and I saw this cool superpower that languages gives you. I actually just loved being able to like tell my mom, like, no, mom, do this and that. And like that kind of was the trigger for me where I'm like, imagine if I had this superpower in a bunch of other languages. So then I learned French, Spanish, Italian, dabbled in a little Egyptian Arabic, Greek, and now I'm learning Dutch. I'm learning Flemish. So we wanted to start with the beginning of it all, the why. What is the motivation behind why we learn languages? So each of us are going to answer. We're probably going to ask each other questions because I'm
Yeah.
really excited. I feel like language learning is such an isolated process, and it's really hard to get this one-on-one time with a fellow language lover. So I want to know, what motivates you to keep learning languages? What value does it bring into your life? And how has it really shaped aspects of your life?
As a child, I grew up in Istanbul and I didn't know any languages, obviously. And one day I witnessed my dad talking to tourists in English. And then I was like, how can you just communicate with everyone in English? Like, that sounds weird because, like, they probably have their own languages. And then he told me, like, if you learn English, you can basically talk to everyone. So that was super surprising for me. So that's basically how I was interested in language learning.
I feel like those young memories of whether it's you witnessing your dad speaking English and like when it clicks, those are the first seeds that you're like aware of this massive ability. And similar to you, I had that understanding. I was around 5 years old when my mom started traveling to the US, and it was the first time that I realized that there were countries that like the concept of a country existed, that people spoke different languages in those countries. And she would come back and teach us little words here and there, but she didn't speak English either. And then one day she just asks us, hey, do you guys want to go on an adventure? And this is all in Portuguese, of course, because we didn't speak English. And me being a 5 year old, like, yeah, mom, let's go on an adventure. And the next thing you know, I'm in an English speaking classroom. I didn't speak any English at all. And it was a game of learning as fast as you possibly could because, you had to do homework, you had to talk to your classmates. And that shaped everything that came next. It shaped me with empathy of knowing what it's like to not understand and not be understood. And then I started thinking, like, well, what if I could help other people in other languages? And that just kept me motivated. And so also, I really love the idea of living an international life, not just going as a foreigner, but like going and learning about the place because I'm able to speak to the people in their language and at the
Yeah.
very least understand them in their language. Because we all know that it's easier to start understanding than expressing. But when you can come communicate back and be like, oh, this is my opinion, it just elevates everything.
The thing that I could define as the biggest win is studying in Italy in Italian, being the only foreigner in the class. I
That's
think that's pretty impressive.
crazy. How did you even get into that program? That's insane.
Yeah, actually, I also find this insane because, like, sometimes you just realize that you go to school at 8 a.m. and then just join in a bunch of Italian students at your age, and then you basically do the same things as them. I think that's super crazy, but obviously, language learning has opened all those doors for me, and I'm super grateful for that.
For me, my biggest language win, I think, has been creating a truly international life where I have friends around the world who text me every day in their language. And it's like, wow, that's insane. Or even for work, like in right now, I host retreats and I go to Greece and I speak to the host in Greek, and she treats me like her daughter. And then she treats my guests like her daughters. And now I'm organizing one in Italy and I'm speaking and I'm coordinating a full experience in Italian. And I'm just like, that's insane. Like you couldn't do this. You couldn't reach this level of connection with people if you didn't take an interest in their language. And
Yes, of course.
yeah, it's isn't it crazy? Like when you don't know a language, it seems impossible. And then when you learn it, you're like, oh, I guess it wasn't impossible. What else am I capable of learning?
Yes, but in my case, I think most of the times I just take this for granted, like going to any country and then I was speaking with the locals in their language and always like get this positive reactions. But sometimes I realize that that's actually something super rare. And yeah, that's actually crazy to think about, but it actually feels really good because you kind of like get to observe what language learning can do for you in your life. And I think that's super motivating. Yeah, I think we can just kind of change the direction of this conversation because, like, yes, language learning is super motivating and rewarding, but most of the people, when they encounter those difficulties, they just don't realize that this is actually a supernatural part of the process. So I think we can just go through this. Well, for me, one of the biggest problems in language learning is people just expecting to be fluent since the very beginning, which is kind of impossible. Have you experienced something like this?
Yeah, I think we all have these rose-colored glasses when we start a language that we're like, I'm smart, I can do it. Week one, I'll be able to do everything in the language. And then the reality sets in and you're like, ooh, this
It's
is
so humbling.
yeah, yeah, like this is hard.
Yeah.
Feel that way where you always expect a lot of yourself at the beginning of a language process?
Sometimes yes, because I tend to compare my languages like among each other. Like I was super fluent in Italian, but right now I just don't have the same amount of proficiency in Russian. Like it's just kind of discouraging, but I think at some point you should just realize that all languages have different structures and you're less familiar with some of them, so you should just take your time.
But even when you're learning your first language, because people in the room are probably learning their first target language, how did you feel when you were learning French?
Oh my God, like you're not gonna believe me, but for the like first 3 years, I couldn't even make a sentence in
What?
French.
3 years.
Yeah, but yeah, I don't know, maybe that's because of my age, but I absolutely wasn't fluent and I basically didn't know anything except for like the greetings. I just
But
didn't know how to learn a language.
were you studying and reading book? Like, how were you attacking that language?
Well, I was studying mostly with the wrong methods, like just downloading random apps and trying, like waiting for the language to spawn in my brain, but obviously that didn't happen.
But I do think that the 3 years that you couldn't form a sentence, that was also necessary because it's like priming your brain and things are happening that are not obvious. It's almost like the way I think of language learning or learning anything really, it's like a tree and the roots are growing underground and you literally cannot see that the plant is growing. And then all of a sudden, like a bamboo, did you know bamboo grows underground for like 7 years before it sprouts up? And then when it sprouts up like so tall. And people are like, oh, how did this happen? It's because of all of the stuff that's happened underground that no one sees. And I think the hard part about language learning is staying motivated when you do not see gains. Like when you don't
Progress.
see the bamboo, how do you stick to it? So how did you continue even if 3 years in you couldn't speak?
Well, I think here the crucial point is at some point just realizing that you have to change something. This can be your study method, this can be your motivation level, or like basically your perspective towards a language. As soon as I changed this, I just started seriously studying French with better resources and feeling actually more motivated to learn it. Like I was convinced that I was going to learn French. And since I had this like 3 years of French background, always listening to French, I wasn't like a complete beginner. So this was also kind of helpful. And then as I changed my method and just started working on seriously, many of my problems were solved.
Okay, I feel like I 100% have a similar experience with you. I started learning French in high school and I was naturally better than most people because I could understand. But it wasn't until I think 3 years in as well when I had this really, he was very severe, this teacher who really, really, really wanted me to win. But he straight up looked at me and was like, Jasmine, c'est pas possible. Like, t'es intelligente. You're smart. You need to study. So he kind of like shook me and said, you are only going to learn this language if you put in the work. And I swear that was like a click in my brain where maybe you have this natural affinity for languages, but it will not get into your brain. You will not be fluent unless you put in the hours and the work. So that changed everything for me. And then when I applied myself and did the extra homework and did the grammar charts and like really took the time, it became easy, harder and easier. And then the thing that really changed everything for me was making full videos in those languages and having to sit through the editing process and be like, oh damn, like that's wrong. That's not feminine. That's not the right verb conjugation. That's terrible.
Yeah, actually, that's also a really important point because I started my channel in French. So the language was French, the videos were about French, and I was also like always paying attention to what I was saying. So I think that's super important as well. And it's kind of like interesting that we kind of had the same path in French. But the 3 years, like that time frame, I think that's actually quite normal for your brain to accept something brand new. And I think at that age, 3 years is like super acceptable because like then later when I was learning other languages that are super different, like German and Russian, it took me like a year to like decently speak or say some things in that language.
Well, you learn also how to learn. And I think that's a big part of what we're talking about today is that there's a moment where it clicks for you. This is how my brain works best, which we're going to get into. A few other questions before we move on, though. How do you keep the languages fresh when you're fluent? And are some languages more challenging than others?
Like, so my life is kind of built around the language that I speak, so I kind of don't have the opportunity to just forget them.
Well, a key difference, it's not that your life was built, it's you built your life to be.
Yeah, so to say, maybe.
Like there was probably a moment where you were thinking, how do I keep these languages in my daily life? Do you remember what that moment was and what you did after?
Well, I think it's kind of at that level, I think you should kind of work on your motivation and your goals, like what you want to achieve with this language. Like, are you just learning it so that you can tell, well, I speak this language? Or do you want to do something with this language? This can be a project, this can be a part of your school, this can be a work or a travel. So I think this kind of depends on you. But in the past, I didn't have like such moments, like maybe only once, because when I started learning Russian, I absolutely hated the language and I was crying every time I studied it. But then I just took a break.
Why were you even learning it?
I wanted to learn it, but I didn't like it. I don't know, it doesn't it doesn't make sense. But then I just started watching Russian movies, listening to Russian songs, and I kind of got interested in it again. And then it was more motivating to study it. My mother always wanted me to learn Russian, and I don't know, in my childhood, I kind of had this like, in the future, I'm going to learn this, this, this, and Russian was also in that list. So
Wow.
yeah.
Okay. I feel like I had that moment too at one point. Like, Привет, меня зовут Joanna Kokdila. Like, I did a little bit of like enough to impress people. Yeah, for me, how do I keep languages fresh? It's definitely maintaining those friendships and sending voice notes to friends. Now it's actually been really cool to design work like retreats. So like I said, I'm the founder of a company. It's a journaling company. And 2 years ago, we started doing retreats. And then I started thinking like, how cool would it be to use languages as an excuse to host these retreats abroad? And every year, every summer, I'm staying with my Greek mama, Katerina Mu, and like I'll go there and I practice my Greek. And in between knowing that, oh, I have a retreat coming up in June, let me brush up on my Greek. Let me send her an email. Let me connect to her daughter. Like these are new things that I'm planting into my life that are work related that allow me to keep my languages fresh.
Yes, I actually agree with your point. I haven't had the chance to experience this as much as you, probably because of my age, but studying in Italy, I can actually also realize like that kind of thing because like I basically have no chance to forget Italian or just do nothing about Italian at this point because it has basically become a part of my life.
So the big question, I am so curious to hear what you think. This is the question that both you and I talked about. This is the one question we always get asked as polyglots. Can you learn more than one language at once?
Okay, let's give short answers. My answer is yes, obviously. What do you think?
Okay, mine is not so short. It's a controversial opinion. I feel like yes and no. I think yes, you can you could do anything you set your mind to. However, I feel like if you don't have a good grip on one of the languages and you're a beginner in both of the languages, it's going to be a train wreck because it's so much input for your brain. So that's my thoughts, especially if you're a new language learner. I think if it's me and you, like we've learned languages before, we can make it happen. But if you're new to language learning, I would commit to one language until you get to like a B2 level so that you can speak the language, you know what the language is, and then you introduce a new language.
In the past, it was kind of more difficult for me to learn languages at the same time, but when you just build some kind of background in several languages, then it becomes possible. Also, I think that also depends on the person because right now my sister is learning German and she's like 14, and I wouldn't force her to learn Spanish and French as well because basically she's 14.
So when I think about like a work schedule and friends and family and this and that, I'm always thinking, what is the realistic amount of time that somebody has in their life to learn a language? If they're learning a language for the first time, it's really hard to add something else on top of a busy schedule. So it's like, how do you find those moments of time where you can schedule it in? A great example is I was learning Egyptian Arabic and I was committing, full-blown committing. And then I went to Greece and then I'm like, okay, what about Greek? And then it was quick for me to see in the grand scheme of my life, it's too much for me to learn two languages that are very complex with everything else I have going on in my life. So there's always that realistic, like how much time do you have and how much time are you willing to make? Because it is a sacrifice.
Well, I must add this at this point because I think many people just believe that it's totally impossible to work on several languages at the same time, but I think actually everyone can do this after some work, after some kind of background. And obviously, time management, as you just kind of open up the topic, is really like it plays a crucial role here because like people like us who speak like so many languages, I think that's a result of years of work, and many people just tend to forget this and then they start comparing themselves to polyglots who are already learning languages since like 10 years. But here the point is like just deciding on what you want to learn, which languages are crucial for you, and for what you actually have interest. I think here are some questions that everyone should ask themselves. And then just creating your daily or weekly schedule in a way that you will like over time achieve fluency in these languages or just improve your level in one of them and just grab the basics in the other one. Many people just don't realize like they should be very concrete with their goals, like super specific goals, what I want to achieve in this language, like which level or which kind of material do I want to complete, which language course do I want to complete. I think many people just don't ask themselves this question from the very beginning, so that's where actually we encounter problems with time management.
And of course, you need to take action, you need to schedule classes, you need to commit to reading the books that you've bought, you need to take notes, review them. So I love the idea of like kind of reverse engineering your goals to say, okay, in 2024, my goal is to get to B1 in French. And then what does that look like every month? What milestones are you reaching? So I definitely think that that's a great tip. Because thinking I want to be fluent in a language, that's such an overwhelming goal. And then you start comparing yourself to polyglots or people who speak it, and you're like, it's so easy for them, I'll never be able to do it. But I feel like tune out the clutter and create these smaller goals for yourself. For me, I do that every month. I'll right now, because I'm learning Dutch, I'll be like, okay, I want to make a script in Dutch and I want to write a whole thing without needing translators, and I want to communicate with my in-laws in Dutch and take my, future mother-in-law to coffee and only speak to her in Dutch, which I did yesterday, by the way. It was exhausting, but I did it. And those small wins are like checkpoints, but you need to keep up with those small wins because they'll create the bigger picture fluency. I do think it takes sacrifice, even if that means every Saturday morning you're carving out an hour for your language, or Wednesday nights you're going to that intensive class. Like, it must be scheduled, otherwise it will not happen. I feel like every time I know I'm neglecting a language, like Spanish right now, I'm not speaking Spanish. So yesterday I was watching some series and I purposely chose to watch a series in Spanish.
I did the same for French.
So strategy and methods, what do you look for when you're choosing your methods? How does it differ from language to language? And do you like to follow curriculums or self-study?
I think here we're going to have a great discussion because I'm totally a supporter of self-studying.
Yeah, me too, me too. I think
Yeah.
depending on the language, right? And I think we've both learned in both ways, self-study and curriculum.
Yeah, we can go in detail. Well, for me, the language method is like it should be adapted to my way of learning things. Because personally, I learn everything on my own, and I don't know how that sounds, but I kind of don't like when people teach me something. So I really liked school as a kid, but for me, school was like I go to school, so I kind of get an idea what's happening, and then I go and study everything at home.
I like it. I like it. Independent girls. So you're self-study to the core.
And also for me, like when I hear things and then when I just repeat them on my own or when I tell it to someone else, I remember them so easily. So for me, the key skills to practice are always listening and speaking.
As we learn more language, we start baking new things into our routine. It's not like you know that this is the way that it works. Like for me, every language I've learned, it exposes me to different resources. And even me as a person, I become different. I realize like, oh, I love reading the newspaper. So let me subscribe to this easy Dutch newspaper, Wablieft. And like that's the highlight of my week is getting my news in Dutch. Which isn't something I've ever done in any other language. But I'm with you on self-study. I do like for some complicated new languages, like right now learning Dutch, it's the first language that I'm really learning that's the grammar is crazy, SOV, SVO, like it changes. And I got a good grammar book and I did a few classes, but it did take me assigning 4 hours of that Saturday morning with the grammar book. And I had to look at it myself. And I learned through, similar to you, like listening and speaking. I journal a lot because it allows me to test if am I actually forming thoughts in the correct sentence structure, and then I can test all of it. So I think it changes language to language, but as the more language you know, the better it gets. And that I think is straight up like the way that polyglots become polyglots because you learn two languages, then it becomes like a highway to fluency in others.
Yes, obviously. I think your process depends a lot on your language background, and your language background is not always your native language. Because personally, my native language is Turkish, and I would find it super difficult to learn a language that's similar to Turkish because Turkish is the only language that I know that's similar to Turkish. But I know 8 other languages that kind of have the same structure. So whenever I learn a language that's similar to German, that's similar to French, that's actually way easier. So I think it really depends on your linguistic background and the amount of like motivation you have to continue and the time that you're sacrificing for it because not everyone is just um, like doing the same things to reach fluency and some of them obviously get better results because they are doing better.
So there's a takeaway slide, but I feel like, don't you think that being able to communicate your language learning process on the internet has made the process so much more fun?
Yeah, obviously, I think because like my followers, especially my old followers, they kind of witnessed me growing up because I was 14 when I posted my first video on YouTube. And then they just kind of witnessed everything in my life, all the languages that I learned, like and also a lot of people are just encouraging you to do new things. Recently, I just posted something that I want to learn Finnish. And a lot of Finnish people just texted me, like, telling interesting facts about their languages, telling some similarities with Turkish, with Swedish. It was like, I love being in a community and I love producing new things, which is for me like super motivating. And I think you also have similar feelings on this because you're also doing some other projects, combining language learning and other things that you like. And I think like producing something and offering something to people is always like, as a person, it really contributes to your personal development. What do you think about this?
Yeah, I agree. Completely agree. I also think that there's a level of courage needed to share the messy process of language learning, right? Like, I remember when I first started posting videos in Portuguese when I hadn't really been speaking Portuguese for years. And I was teaching my friend Portuguese, and Brazilians online that didn't know who I was would send terrible comments like, this girl doesn't even speak Portuguese. And I'm like, oh my God, guys, this is so embarrassing. But I would learn through those comments.
You know, I experienced this in both ways. First one was a really negative experience. When I first learned Spanish, it kind of got wild in Turkey and everyone was insulting me for some reason. I don't know. And Spanish is still one of my least favorite languages for this. And the opposite situation is that when I published my first Russian video, I wasn't confident at all. But then I had a bunch of Russians coming to my channel and just writing the best comments ever for me. And this was, I don't know, super motivating. And then I was at the point of almost like stopping making videos on YouTube, but this really motivated me. And right now, this is probably one of the main reasons why I can still just open my camera and talk to people.
And that I think that is something we have access to that other language learners haven't had until today. So a big tip that I always have for people is like share your process. It really will be more good than bad. But language learning, I think the point is language learning is like an act of courage. Like you must have thick skin, you must be willing to put yourself out there because as adults, it's not easy for us to make mistakes and to be corrected, but that's a part of the process. So I think that's one of the things that if you're here and you're really excited about language learning, but you know that it's gonna be scary to speak or you're gonna feel stupid for making that mistake, like make those mistakes. But what are some takeaways that we want to leave everybody with?
Well, I just want everyone to believe in themselves more. And maybe if you're learning a language, you can just create a TikTok account or something and you can post a small video like speaking in that language. And believe me, many natives are going to appreciate what you're doing. And no one is just going to be like, what are you doing there? Like, why would you even post this TikTok? No one is going to say that. So just have the courage to express yourselves in the language that you're learning because it's like the best thing that you can do as a contribution to your current process. Do you agree with me?
Oh my God, I agree so much. And then the motivation is so real when you watch older videos of yourself and you're like, wow, I really didn't speak the language. And now I really speak the language. I always like to compare it to like when you start going to the gym, if you're on a health journey, you need to take the before picture. And then you need to continue to take the pictures when you're in it. I think the main thing, the takeaway is when you're in the process of learning a language, it will
Gotcha.
feel it will feel impossible. It feels impossible for me. I straight up told my boyfriend, I'm like, I don't think I can learn Dutch. I don't know if I can do it. This is not making sense. And this is like 6 months in, 8 months in, and now I'm a year in, and I'm like, wow, I can literally understand everything. I don't need subtitles. I can have a full conversation in Dutch. It's exhausting. And so I'm still not where I want to be, but the fact that
Yeah.
it feels painful, but you cannot give up in that process, I think is really something I want people to remember that even us polyglots, we face that. Somebody asks in the chat, do you think lingoda classes are effective to start learning a language as a beginner? So there's actually a slide about lingoda since they are powering today's conversation. We're here thanks to lingoda. So with lingoda classes, it's really flexible. So you can pick your classes. But what I love about lingoda classes is that they take you from wherever you are and structure the learning. So this is the perfect place to start if you've never learned another language before, and even if you have. So with lingoda, you could pick your classes, and the classes are really small, and you can even do private classes. So yeah, lingoda is an amazing resource for you to start your languages in.
Well, I want to add something about Lingoda because when I started learning with Lingoda, I probably started with like B1 or B2 classes, and right now I'm taking C1 classes, which is like basically for my German C1 exam. But and also the amount of speaking practice that you're getting because there are always like three students at class, so you always get to speak even if you don't want. You're always supposed to have an idea about something, and you learn a bunch of important stuff like the things that you can use in daily life or different topics that you can find in language exams. So I think all of those are super important points.
Yes, thank you everybody for coming. What a beautiful way to start the weekend to get all that learning in on a Saturday and a Sunday. We will see you on the internet. Thank you to Lingoda again.
Thanks everyone for participating and thanks Lingoda for this opportunity. I'm super thankful to be here. And thank you, Joe, for this magnifique discussion. I
It's
really enjoyed it.
I'm now about to learn Turkish. Like now you've inspired me. I already know it's gonna be a collab video.
I
I
should learn Portuguese.
maybe we should, that's 2025. Somebody asked Q1 goals for 2025. Now we have them.
Yeah.
Soon. Bye everyone.
Bye everyone. Nice to see you.